We begin today's class. We began with a prayer. Unfortunately, I was in the wrong page. Now we will be discussing about Mahimacharan. In our last class, we had discussed about Mahimacharan, who is asking a fundamental question that to attain to spirituality, is it necessary to renounce the world? Now, this is a very common question because whether you uh, take Christianity or whether you take up any religion, Buddhism, most of the religions insist on renouncing the world. So that's why, with the exception of Hinduism, which is a religion both for householders as well as monastics, primarily, if you see the teachings of Christ, the teaching of Buddha, and some other religions, of course, other than Islam and mostly they are praising the monastic way of life. So that's why, if you take the fundamental teachings of the Bible or the fundamental teachings of Buddhism, a very great importance or a lot of importance is given to renounce the world, to renounce desires. There's nothing for the worldly people who say that we are not strong enough to renounce, but we can renounce slowly. We want to be in this world, enjoy the world a little. So that's why uh, in Indian tradition, in the Vedic tradition, religion began with the fourfold dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Moksha was only for basically for monks. Can take so the dharma, artha, kama, and moksha would be a very comprehensive idea of religion, because Hinduism said that we cannot leave out anybody. You can't leave out most of the other religions, Semitic religions. They were primarily more suitable for the monastics. I'm not saying householders would not be able to practice that kind of religion. Of course, the church came and then the Buddhists had their Sangha. Buddha was wise enough. He knew, like the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus Christ, which cannot be practiced by ordinary man. Cannot, in the sense the ideals are so high. So one has to renounce the world to even think of practicing the highest teachings of Buddha. So he started a Sangha where some basic teachings like good moral virtues, where you don't need to renounce the word fully, were planned. So also in Christianity, we had the organized church where the tenets of Jesus Christ, like for example, if you take the Sermon on the Mount, many of the householders would feel that it is impossible to live up to those ideals. When somebody strikes your right cheek, you don't just give him the left cheek. It's not possible for a person who has not renounced the world. It's possible for monastics who are leading life in monasteries. Maybe it is possible for them, but not definitely possible where you have to struggle to earn a living. So that's why here Sri Ramakrishna, the question which is being asked by Mahimacharan, who was a householder, he was a great scholar and he liked Vedanta, but at the same time, perhaps he was having some doubts whether he'll be able to renounce. And the idea which Shastras give, the highest teachings of any religion, they give that you have to give up the world. So Sri Ramakrishna is trying to explain to him that there are different stages. You don't have to give up the world right now. So he says, is it necessary to renounce the world? Then he says, suppose my mind goes to God. And as most of the fundamental teachings of different religion, especially the Christian religion, Jesus very clearly says you can't have God and mammon at the same time. That means you can't have devotion and love for God and at the same time love the world equally. So that was not possible. So that idea is there in Hinduism, in all other religions. But Hinduism offers, and some other religions, they offer a graded way. They say, okay, it's not possible to renounce, but at least be detached. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, now and then go into solitude. Just be away from your people for some time at least. Why do you get involved always in all the problems of the world? to live in the world doesn't mean to be worldly. That is a fundamental distinction which Sri Ramakrishna made, and he gave a beautiful example of a parable. He said, the boat can be in water, but the water should not be in the boat. That's not the right place for water to be. A boat can float in the water. So one can live in the world just like the boat, where you don't get drowned. The boat can stay in the water. The right place for the water is below the boat, not inside the boat. If it goes inside, then it will drown. So Swami Sri Ramakrishna said, what's wrong in living in the world? You live in the world, but don't let the world live in you. Then there is a problem. Then you can't handle it anymore, because if more than necessary water enters the boat than it can hold, then the boat will sink. So, but still the question asked by Mahimacharan, who was a bit confused, he was a scholar, as you all know, very well read in the scripture. So he knew that perhaps it would be difficult for anybody to uh, to become religious, to become spiritual, and at the same time enjoy the worldly life. Then he says, but my mind has gone to him. When the mind has gone to him, why do you stay with the family anymore? Though he did not have a very big family, still he was a bit confused whether I should be part of the family or whether I should devote myself to spiritual practices. And he is trying to ask Sri Ramakrishna, know his opinion. He says, when the mind has finally gone to him, I am deeply interested in spirituality, then why should I stay with the family anymore? That's the question. Now Sri Ramakrishna is giving him a beautiful parable as usual. He gives a story, he never tries to explain anything through philosophy. What he does is he says, have you heard that story of Rama's will? Now he's trying to tell him the story of Rama's will, what Rama's will is. Sri Ramakrishna says, what are you saying? Where will you go if you don't stay in the family? Now you see, Sri Ramakrishna used to grade, he used to normally tell the would-be sannyasin disciples like Swami Vivekananda not to come when householders come. He used to advise them or give them the right advice at the right time, and used to preferably call them on weekdays when others were not there. So when other householders came, he knew that he had to grade, I mean, suitably modify his advice so that they can understand, or at least they can make an attempt to practice spirituality in their day-to-day life. So these conversations, as you all know, Mahimacharan is a householder, though he's a scholar, but very deeply religious. He's torn between his worldly duties and at the same time is deeply interested or deeply loves God. So he says, my mind has gone to him, so why should I stay in the family anymore? Perhaps he wants Sri Ramakrishna like Hajara did. Hajara was, of course, trying to avoid, because he had a large family to maintain, so he somehow wanted to escape. And Sri Ramakrishna knew his psychology, he knew his mind. So then he said, no, no, you can't leave. Who will look after your parents? He wanted to simply avoid taking the responsibility of a big family which he had and come and stay at Dakshineshwar permanently. So Sri Ramakrishna knew the particular advice he had to give to particular people in different situations. But here he knew that Mahimacharan was genuinely interested in religion and spirituality, and he really loved God. So naturally, he needed to be given a piece of advice which would suit both his aspirations, his duties towards the world, without neglecting his duties towards the world. He had to be given an advice which would make him spiritual at the same time. So he says, what are you saying? Where will you go if you don't stay in the family? I clearly see that I am in Rama's Ayodhya wherever I am. Now he gives him a beautiful example of a person who was deeply devoted to his Ishta, was Rama. And he had a strange way of uh, accepting the life's truths. Whenever anything happened, good or bad, he would say it is Rama's will. He never tried to uh, justify or rather feel bad or good about something. If something good happened, okay, it's Rama's will. If something bad, so he had a very balanced view about life, and that is because he ascribed everything to Rama's will. So Sri Ramakrishna is just referring to this story and says, wherever I am, I clearly see that I am in Rama's Ayodhya. That means I am in the company of Rama, practicing the presence of God. That's what some of the saints of Christianity, like Brother Lawrence, used to say, because they did not get a chance to learn theology and all. He did not get a chance to learn theology. So he was in the monastery, practically feeling himself to be out of place there because all were scholars and he was the only one who was very simple and hardly had any learning. So he was given all the menial duties like cooking, cleaning, and all those things. So he was in the beginning feeling that am I missing out something? All my other brother monks and Dabot and all those people are doing religious sermons and all. He was not even allowed to go there because he could not sing properly. He was not trained. He could not read. He could not write. He was almost semi-illiterate. So Brother Lawrence later on uh, did the best thing he could, practicing the presence of God. That's what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, that if you have simple faith, then you don't need to learn theology or the scriptures and bother yourself with all the spiritual truths. What is required that you practice the presence of God or see that God is involved in every act of your life. So that makes your whole life divine. So that is a beautiful story. Having his Sri Ramakrishna is now explaining to Mahimacharan to just convince him that wherever you are, just be happy and try to make the best of where God has placed you. He has placed you in the world. He has made you a scholar. You are devoting sufficient amount of time to your religious studies, which he did not want. He did not want Mahimacharan to overstudy or to spend a lot of time in unnecessary scriptural arguments and all, which he was fond of. And at the same time, he did not want him to neglect his duties. In the name of scriptural learning, he was perhaps so to solve both the problems. He said, why do you make your spiritual life so complicated? You just think it is Rama's will and just have this attitude, and your spiritual life will become smooth. So, having received spiritual instruction, now these are Sri Ramakrishna's words. Having received spiritual instruction from his guru, Rama said, I will renounce the world. Now, this was when he was under training with the Rishi Vasishtha. In those days, they had to go to Gurukula and learn away from their family. That's where true learning took place. You could not go home. You could not stay in the palace. Whether you are a prince, or a poor boy, they all had to stay with their guru, with lead the same austere life. Same facilities were given, and he had to go to the Gurukula and live with ordinary people. So that is where he got knowledge, and his guru was Vasishtha, who taught him all along with archery and other. They used to teach them secular subjects as well as spiritual subjects and spirituality. But he was so impressed with the spiritual truths that he felt, what is the point in going back to my palace? I want to renounce this world and go to the forest. That was the tradition in those days, that people who were really wanting to practice spirituality full time, they would leave their homes or and go into the forest. So he wanted to imitate his guru, Vasishtha. Of course, Vasishtha he was not he had a family, and the Gurukula normally would be run by most of the householders, but they led semi-reclusive lives. But there were some gurus who were unmarried also. So perhaps that attracted Ramachandra, and he said, I want to renounce the world, because he found that if this is the highest truth, then why should I go back to the world and become a king and then do all the administration and other duties? They will distract me from God. So that is what I meant when I said that most of the teachings, the highest teachings of all the great religious leaders, are meant for people who renounce the world. So that gives the impression that we cannot become religious or spiritual if we, especially we cannot become spiritual, not religious. Religious anybody can become. But if we want to be truly spiritual, we have to renounce the world. So that idea comes, which was not the idea which the Vedic rishis thought. They said it's okay if you can do that, but how many people can do it? So what about the rest of them? So they had this four purusharthas: dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. There was place for everybody and everything in life. So if you cannot do this, do this. If you cannot do this, it's a graded kind of progress which one could make. So here now Vasishtha, being the guru of Rama, knew that Rama, being the eldest son, would definitely would have to take the responsibilities of the kingdom once his father Dasharatha decides to crown his son, who being the eldest among the other brothers, he was the eldest, so he would be asked, and he was fit also, he was very well trained. So he knew that if he renounces his kingdom, the people will suffer. So they needed a noble king. So he said, Dasharatha was upset. When he heard this, Rama was not showing an interest, and he thought, if the highest can be attained by me, then why should I go for all these things? Now he told the Guru, now you explain to him not to renounce the kingdom or the world, and because he has to fulfill his duties. So Vasishtha decided to convince Rama that it doesn't matter what you do in life, but you have to go back. So Dasharatha called Vasishtha in to make Rama change his mind. Vasishtha saw that Rama had acquired deep dispassion. He knew that it's very difficult to convince him now, because he himself has taught him the highest religious truths, and he will definitely question if you say this is the way, this is what the scriptures say. A true Christian, a true Buddhist will definitely ask, if Jesus said God and mammon cannot go together, if we take really Jesus Christ seriously, or even the Upanishads seriously, or the teachings of Buddha seriously, then the question arises that why did they say like this? How can, if God and mammon or God and the world cannot go together, then what are we doing in this world? So now the problem comes when people who are not fit to follow these highest teachings, who have a little bit of desires left. So Buddha and Christ and the later Christianity and Buddhism made provision for such people also, who could in a very gradual way reach that state when they could perhaps uh, take to full-time spirituality or full-time pursuit of God. So here Rama, of course, in Rama's case it was different. He was a Avtara himself. He was belonged to a special category. So, but still Vasishtha, just as he would tell the other students, told him, you first reason with me, and if you get convinced, or if you don't get convinced, then you can renounce and do whatever you like. But first reason with me. Why do you want to renounce? You tell me. So he said, this is part of a very famous Ramayana, which is known as Yoga Vasishtha Ramayana. It's not the Valmiki Ramayana. You have to remember that. There are many versions of Ramayana. Yoga Vasishtha Ramayana is a slightly different text. It's a primarily text prescribed for people uh, who are aspiring to become monastics. But even in that, Yoga Vasishtha is ascribed to Vasishtha Muni himself. So he said, if one is a gnani, if one knows the fundamentals of spirituality, then it really doesn't matter whether you are a householder, whether you live in the household or you become a monastic. And Janaka was an excellent example. His own father-in-law, Rama's father-in-law, who was a Brahmagyani, they say. He had been to monasteries, he did lot of tapasya, and then later on became the king. But even as a king, he had total dispassion. So Vasishtha then called Rama, who was a student at that time. First reason out with me, later you may renounce the world. Tell me, is the world without God? Now, this is what was taught to him, that God is everywhere. Sarvam khalu idam Brahma. That is one of the basic tenets of the Upanishads. So, if you see that, then it's just a question of choice whether you want to follow God or reach God through the monastic path or through the worldly path. But in either case, God is not apart from the world. We cannot separate God and the world. But that doesn't mean, as Sri Ramakrishna said, that you have to allow the world to enter you. You can live in the world, but don't allow the world to influence you. So he says, if that is so, then you renounce it. Where will you go? Even if you renounce the world, God is everywhere. So you can't renounce. You have to find out a way where you can align yourself or connect yourself to God wherever you may be. And then Sri Ramakrishna, Rama then understood that God himself has become the world, its creatures, everything. It is because of his power that one perceives everything as real. Then Ramchandra became silent. So it was easy to convince him because he was taught both the things. But now, Sri Ramakrishna is giving some other examples, and then he will tell the story of that uh, Rama's will. We'll come to that. Then he says, you have to fight. These are Sri Ramakrishna's words. He's still continuing, trying to explain to Mahima Charan. First, he gave Rama's example, how Vasishtha convinced him not to leave the world. The idea is that he wants Mahima Charan also to stay in the world as he was, just as he advised M. M also was deeply disturbed and wanted to commit suicide because of his domestic problems. And that is the state in which he went to Sri Ramakrishna. And he wanted, perhaps he also wanted to renounce the worldly life. But then Sri Ramakrishna somehow prevailed with him and asked him to just continue where he was. So also Maimacharan, though did not have such difficulties as M had, but then still he was deeply spiritual. Then he says, what you have to fight against lust, anger, and so on in worldly life. You have to fight against various desires. You have to fight against attachment. If the fight is from inside the fort, it is convenient. It is better to fight from home. Then there you get your food and your wife helps you in so many ways. In the Kali Yuga, life depends on food. It's better to be at one place than to roam around for food from one place to another. Living at home is like fighting from inside the fort. So he gives a beautiful example. There are two ways to fight your battle within the safety of the fort. If you try to fire on your enemy, you are safer because you will be prevented from getting hit. But if you want to go on into the open ground and try to have an open fight, then it may be difficult. There may come a bullet from any side, and or maybe bows and arrows in those days. So you might get hit. So it's always safer to protect yourself in a fort and then fight the enemy. So he's giving that example. And then at the same time, he says you should live in the world like a torn off leaf in a storm. Now, this is, he's trying to explain, being in the world doesn't mean that you always try to have your way in the world and try to do everything what you don't be full of desires. There is a way to live in the world also. You don't have to, it's like a torn off leaf in a storm. In a storm, a leaf is torn. The leaf does not decide where it wants to go. It's the storm or the wind that decides where the leaf should be. So wherever the wind blows, the leaf is happy, and wherever it settles down, it's happy to stay put. So that is what he is telling. The storm sometimes takes it inside a house, sometimes to a garbage heap. The leaf is carried away wherever the wind takes it. Sometimes to a clean place, sometimes to a dirty one. He has put you in the world. It is good that you stay there. Again, if he wishes, he may lift you from there and carry you to a better place. But let it happen as it will. Now he is giving an example. What can you do? Rather than the heading of this particular topic is resignation in family life, Rama's will. This is meant for Maimacharan. And Sri Ramakrishna continues, what can you do if you are kept in the world? Just resign, surrender everything to him, everything to God. Then there will be no trouble. Then you will realize that it is he who is doing everything. All depends on Rama's will. Then a devotee who was sitting nearby, he did not understand what is this Rama's will. So he said, Rama's will? What is that story? Or perhaps he has heard, he wanted Thakur to repeat it. Anyway, Sri Ramakrishna says, now he is telling the story. This was how he gave advice or taught people, taught the devotees through parables, and just like Jesus and Buddha did through tales and parables. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, there was a weaver in a village who was very religious. Everybody trusted him and loved him. The weaver would go to the market to sell his cloth. When a customer asked the price, he would say, by Rama's will, cotton thread cost 1 rupee. By Rama's will, labor charges are 4 annas. By Rama's will, profit is 2 annas. Even the profit he will say. So the price of the cloth by Rama's will is 1 rupee. So he was so transparent. People try to hide these things, especially business people. Do not disclose what is the profit. He says, this is my profit, this is the cotton cost, this is the cost of the thread, this is the cotton cost, this is my charges, I'm charging you to annas. In those days, rupees, there were 16 annas in a rupee. 6 paisa is 1 anna. Now that system has changed. So the price of the cloth by Rama's will is 1 rupee and 6 annas. People had so much faith in him that they would immediately pay the price and take the cloth. Naturally, if somebody is so transparent and so honest. So he was doing well. I mean, honesty pays, they say. People had so much faith in him that they would immediately pay the price and take the cloth. The fellow was a great devotee as well. It's not that he was just a moral person. He was a great devotee. And the basis of his honesty was not just to become a morally good person, but really depend on Rama's will. Because Rama in the sense, Rama was his Ishta, his God. So naturally he thought that whatever I do, I'm doing it as a service, so I should not cheat, or whatever I do as an offering to my Ishta should be perfect. So he says, the fellow was a great devotee as well. After dinner, he would sit in the worship hall till late at night, meditating on God, singing his glories. One night, now you see what a strange incident happened. Life was going on smoothly. He was selling his cloth, making a profit also, whatever profit he had decided. But then Rama's will doesn't mean that every time life will be all very smooth. There will be no difficulties. You have to assert Rama's will even when you are in trouble, even during troubled times. So here he was just meditating and he was doing everything perfectly okay. That's what happens in our life. We expect when we take up to spiritual life, everything will be very smooth. And that is the wrong idea. We expect God to solve all our problems and see that no problems come to us. But that is not what is Rama's will is all about. Swami Sri Ramakrishna is very keen to explain this point, that don't think Rama's will always be pleasant. So after dinner, he would sit in the worship hall till late at night and meditating on God and sing his glories. Now this was a perfect setting for a devotee. Everything is going on right. He is not harming anybody. He is honest. He is morally good and very deeply meditative. But then sometimes our past karma or fate or whatever you call it brings lot of trouble, and these troubled times test you. Just God perhaps deliberately sends these difficulties just to see whether you really believe in Rama's will. If everything is going on smoothly in our life, then there is no problem. We can say it is Rama's will. Everything is happened by mother's will or Thakur's will. It's very easy to say. But when things go terribly wrong, and still if you can say it is Rama's will, then the real devotion of that devotee is tested. That's what Sri Ramakrishna wanted to say. That don't think that this person, though he is simple and guileless and honest, he did not have to face difficulties. One night it was very late, but this fellow did not feel sleepy. He was sitting there smoking when a group of robbers, dacoits, literally dacoits, passed by to commit a robbery. They needed a porter. Now these dacoits were also lazy. They would not only rob, but they robbed so much that they needed somebody to carry what they have stolen. So they came to the weaver and saw he was just meditating, poor fellow. They caught him. He was not involved in the robbery, but they said, "Come with us." They took him by the hand. Then they robbed a house, placed many articles on the poor weaver's head to carry. Now, just then the police arrived. The thieves ran away. Naturally, they ran away, but the poor fellow was carrying all the stolen things. So, the weaver was caught with all those articles on his head. He was kept in the police lockup late till late that night. The next day, fortunately he was not kept long enough. Immediately the next day, he was taken to the magistrate to prove that he was not guilty. So the next day he was tried by a magistrate. When the villagers came to know of it, they all came to the jail because everybody knew, nobody would believe that this person can commit a robbery. So they all came and see, but then the things were found on his body. He was carrying them, and that is foolish. You don't get involved in all these things. But still, in spite of this difficulty, because he was thinking that it is Rama's will, you see how he gets freed. How God solves his problem. Then he says, uh, "Tell me what happened." The magistrate, they all said this fellow could never commit a robbery. But the magistrate was not convinced. He said, "How can I take your word? He was found. There is evidence that he had stolen these things." Then he has to prove that he has not stolen. Then the magistrate asked the weaver, "Tell me what happened then, if you are not guilty." Then he said, very innocently, because he could not tell lies. So he said, "Sir, by Rama's will, I took rice at night. By Rama's will, I sat in the worship hall. By Rama's will, again, it was very late at night. By Rama's will, I was meditating on him and singing his glories. When, again by Rama's will, a group of thieves passed by. By Rama's will, they pulled me up and took me along with them. By Rama's will, they committed robbery in somebody's house. By Rama's will, they placed the load on my head. Then by his will, only I was caught. By Rama's will, the police put me in jail. And now, this morning, by Rama's will, I have been brought before you. Now you decide." By Rama's will, the right decision will come. So, seeing that the fellow was so simple and so honest, the magistrate discharged him. On the way home, the weaver said to his friends, "You see, by Rama's will, I have been discharged." So, even that, he didn't take credit for that. He believed that just as Rama had put me into difficulty, it was he who solved. Otherwise, you have this ego, "Oh, that I got freed myself." He would have boasted. So he didn't boast. He just said, "What happened to you? What were you doing in the jail?" He said, "By Rama's will, I went there. By Rama's will, I came out." So what else can you do? Now, Sri Ramakrishna is explaining the significance of this. What else can you do? A clerk was sent to jail. Now he is giving another funny example. He had this habit of adding some humor to these wonderful teachings. He said a clerk went to jail. When the period of his sentence ended, he was released from jail. Now, will he dance joyfully to the beat of the drum, or he will return to his job as a clerk? So that's what he says. You can't do anything what you wish. I mean, there's a great teaching in this, that very often we want so many things. The idea is that the desire cannot or should not be entertained, and we should not hope for things ourselves. Let things happen the way God wishes. Then our life will be smooth. A lot of problems will be solved. That's what he wanted to say. Don't decide now because you are married. Now you just don't decide that I can't have God if I'm married, I can't really reach God. He has decided maybe you need this kind of experience. You are in that stage of life now where he has put you there. Now you see, if you work really hard, maybe a day may come when he will free you from those responsibilities. There is a beautiful poem by Narsim Mehta. You know, Narsim Mehta was a saint of Gujarat who wrote some beautiful poems. He was a married person, but at the same time, he was a great saint. Now, his wife was terribly anti-religious. I mean, he faced difficulties all his life, and whenever he wanted to do something, pray, she will come and disturb him. And in spite of that, he used to run away and go to the forests and do some try to avoid, but then his family responsibilities, he had a daughter as well, so she used to pester him, who will marry your daughter, you have to take a loan. Poor fellow had to take a loan and marry off the daughter, and then he was involved constantly. Every time he tried to practice devotion, somehow he was a great devotee of Krishna, so somehow or the other, his wife would drag him to the world. So this happened for a very long time. And he was literally, if you see the poems which he wrote in the initial stages, he weeps to God. He said, see, I want to pray to you, but you see this troubles. Why can't you solve my troubles? I mean, it was a long, long struggle, but he never gave up hope. And finally, uh, this is what Sri Ramakrishna's this humorous parable, though it is full of humor, there is a great reality in that. That what happens, this particular parable. So, Narsim Mehta's, after giving lot of trouble, somehow she fell ill. Daughter was also married off, and then she died. So that gave him, so the last portion of his life, whatever years were left, he composed some wonderful songs of devotion. And one of the song, apparently from the worldly point of view, it looks a bit crude, but that's what he said. I mean, he would have suffered so much torture from his wife that he says, you see, I mean, even he took these things as the will of, he struggled, he did not bother, he bore patiently whatever he was subjected to. But at the end of his life, he said, now perhaps you have heard my prayers, now I am free, I am totally free. Because he did not have any, though he was placed in the world, because of his sincere devotion, somehow he became totally free. And then he says, he thanks Krishna that now maybe you have heard my prayers, but it took you so much of time, and now you have made me at least free from responsibility so that I can talk, I can sing your glories. I can. He was a devotee. He composed lot of songs. So most of the songs after he became totally free from family life, they are wonderful songs. Many of them speak of the highest Vedanta, where he says, "Akila Brahmandama Ekatu Sri Hari." Means I see you everywhere. He began with a simple devotion, but then he saw God everywhere. He said, I see the fruits, I see nature, wherever I see you alone. So all these wonderful songs which he composed were in the later part of his life. In the initial part of his life, he was praying to be delivered from all his struggles. It was a prayer, asking God to just solve my worldly problems. But slowly the problems got solved, and finally, when he was alone, when he could practice devotion to his heart's content, he wrote some of his most beautiful songs. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. A person liberated in this very life may live as a householder if he so wills. I mean, now he is talking of something different, that Janaka, after getting knowledge or after attaining devotion, there was no harm if he there was it did not harm him if he lived in the world. For a man who has attained spiritual knowledge, there is nothing like here and there. It is all the same for him. Everything here as well as there. There means a monastic life, or here means the world. So whether you are living in this world or that profession or this profession, it's all belongs to him, and if we live with that attitude, then there is no problem. Now he is giving a live example. Of course, this is about Keshav Chandra Sen, and Sri Ramakrishna was so childlike that it didn't. People would be afraid to even discuss about some of the defects of great people like Keshav Sen. People were so hypocritical, you could not, because he was so powerful, such a head of an organization, founder of a great movement. But Sri Ramakrishna just spoke whatever he felt. When even in front of Keshav, in front of some of the disciples, sometimes got angry. How dare you speak about? But Keshav was such a wonderful person. He stopped everybody. He said, no, what he says is right. Because he was a genuine spiritual aspirant. Thakur loved him because of that. So he would not bother if people felt insulted. His disciples, Keshav never felt insulted, but he used to speak out his mind when something was being preached, and Keshav knew that there are some defects which are still there in the religion which he has founded, the sect of religion which he had founded, the Brahmo Samaj. And Sri Ramakrishna very nicely, but in a very, very definite way, used to point out the problems, how they were hindering spiritual progress. So he is now quoting in front of others, knowing fully well that there would have been a few Brahmos there, and he's talking about their founder, just to point out to them that uh, even great leaders make some mistakes. So when I first met Keshav Sen, he says, at a garden house, I said, he has cast off his tail. Now people didn't understand. They were all angry. Everybody in the assembly laughed and they didn't understand. What is casting off the tail mean? That means either you were like a monkey or something else who had a tail and now you cast off the tail. So the whole assembly laughed. They could not understand the deep meaning behind this joke. Keshav said, please don't laugh. Keshav was very alert. He said Thakur would not just joke for fun. Even his jokes had a deep spiritual import and meaning. So Keshav, all of them took it so superficially that Keshav has lost his tail. Now if you tell a person you have lost your tail, naturally it means that you are like a monkey now. So they felt, how dare Sri Ramakrishna say that? Or either it's a joke. So they started laughing and they were confused. But Keshav knew that Sri Ramakrishna will not make any insignificant statement. He says his words have meaning. Let us ask. Let me ask him. Then I said, Thakur replied, as long as a frog doesn't shed its tail, the tadpole has a tail. You all know, those who have read biology, that when the frog grows, the tadpole sheds the tail and then the frog doesn't have a tail. As long as the frog doesn't shed its tail, it has to live in water. It can't climb onto dry land and move around. The tadpoles have to swim in water. And when they shed off the tail, that means when they become little frogs, they can jump out and survive on land also. So he says they can both, then as soon as it loses its tail, it hops out onto the bank. Then it can live both in the water and on land. Similarly, until a man sheds the tail of his ignorance, he lives in the water of worldliness. So if little ignorance is there, even if you want to, you can't jump out of the water. The tadpole cannot jump. If he jumps, he will die. So there is a time for everything. When the right time comes, Sri Ramakrishna will put you in the right place for the right thing. So we have to accept everything as the Lord's will. That is what he says. When he casts off the tail of ignorance and attains knowledge, he is liberated and can move about anywhere. If he likes, he can live as a householder as well. So he says there's no harm, but as long as you have the tail, you just can't uh, live the way you want. Now, the same chapter, Mahimacharan and other devotees are still sitting there drinking the nectar of Sri Ramakrishna's words, which are like variously colored jewels. Now, this is M's commentary. He's just giving an introduction that every teaching of his is like one colored jewel. The devotees pick up as many as they can, but their laps are already full, so heavy that they cannot be lifted. So M is understanding that there are many things which I appreciate, but because of my position in life, I can't experience them all or cannot get the benefit of all. It's too heavy for me. So that's why he said, when he before he wrote the gospel, somebody praised him. He said, "See, I lived on the banks of an ocean. I mean, I lived on the shore of an ocean, large ocean. But unfortunately, I had only one jug with which the jug could hold only a little water. So this little water which I could accommodate in my jug, I could hold in my particular small jug, I'm sharing with humanity, and that is the gospel." So you can imagine how he would have felt when there were so many jewels to be taken. His incapacity to uh, pick up as much as he could pick up, only those which he could. That's why he says they are already full, they cannot lift more than that, but he's just showering the gems. Their capacity is limited, they can't contain no more. Sri Ramakrishna is solving all the problems that have arisen in the human heart. You see, this is a very significant statement. He says Sri Ramakrishna is solving all the problems that have arisen in the human heart since the creation of the world. Now, can you imagine? He is giving so much of importance because he says every issue is solved. Whether we should worship the formless God or the God with form, how to worship him, all these issues have been troubling humankind right from time immemorial. And there have been so many wars for religion that my way is right, your way is wrong. And then let us decide with a fight. That's how religion has grown all over the world. Everybody decides by the sword or by power or whatever it is. The religious wars were so much that people started losing faith in religion. So here she says that problems have been faced by human hearts right from, though there was religion, there was this Vedic religion, but so much of degradation came. There was the prophets came, time and again prophets came, but then they degraded. People could not understand the teachings of those eternal teachings of those prophets and the scriptures, and then they started fighting amongst themselves. So the problems have arisen, and every prophet came with a solution. But the uniqueness of Sri Ramakrishna, that is what M is writing here, that he seems to have an answer for everything. And the dilemma between, some people say no, without monasticism, like Shankaracharya, he said without monasticism you can't get mukti, you have to leave, you have to go to the forest. So there were so many sects. Some people say, I mean, there are different opinions of different prophets. Buddhism has one way, they don't tell you to do bhakti, they'll say why you can get everything to meditation. But then people fail to understand that even before you start meditation, you have to give up desires, because his path begins with giving up of desires, then the meditation. But you can't take piecemeal. That was what Brahmos did. They took some teachings from Christianity, some teachings from Buddhism, and made a synthetic religion which was not satisfying people, because you can't ignore the fundamentals of religion. They can't, you can't, it's not like building a machine. You take some parts from this seller, one manufacturer, and then combine and assemble it. It doesn't happen that way. You have to go to the core. The spirituality works in a totally different way, the spiritual pursuit. So Sri Ramakrishna came and solved these issues were plaguing these people. When uh, M, who was one of the Brahmo followers, all of them were disgusted with all religious, because they saw that there's only fight which is going on. Fights going on in the name of religion. So they found that if nobody can come to a conclusion about religion, then what's the use of religion? So new rational movements and many movements started. I mean, they came up, and then people started following them, and then there was confusion, there was quarrel, and all those things. So the problems have existed, new problems were created when new prophets have to come and solve it. So, depending on the contemporary problem, the avatars come. But when Sri Ramakrishna came, the problems were manifold. You see, that's the beautiful article, Sri Ramakrishna and Hinduism. That's what Swami Vivekananda wrote. That is one of the few things he has wrote about Sri Ramakrishna and distributed in pamphlet forms. So he says, what were the issues, what were the problems when he came? It was a hotbed of problems, and India was the center of that. It was invaded by Britain, before that 700 years of Mughal rule. Then the Western ideas came. I mean, along with the good ideas of the West, the negative things also came. Fanaticism came from the East also. There were so many superstitions already. People were quarreling. And he was saying that India had become a hotbed, especially Calcutta. And people were confused. They did not know whom to believe. Even Swami Vivekananda, he started reading Western philosophers. He started reading Buddha. He was not satisfied. He started reading this person, that person. He started becoming the thought that atheists are much better, seeing the way religious people behave. So it was such a big confusion that the common man of those days, a normal intellectual, would be having so many problems, and they practically lost faith in religion, and they believed that religion did not have a capacity as it was practiced at that time. It was not the spirituality which disillusioned them, but they felt that religion as it was practiced would offer no solutions to the problems of life. That's why these synthetic movements like Brahmo Samaj, which was a hodgepodge of different religions, and they thought that will solve the problem. But unless you go back to the fundamental teachings of these prophets, any prophet, unless we go back to the source. That's why Swamiji, when he came to England, he said, go back to Christ. You are Christians, but that doesn't mean you have understood the teachings of Christ. Same thing he said in India also. You go back to the Vedas. Don't quarrel amongst yourselves. See what the Vedas are saying. See what the original prophets have said. Just go to their basic, simple teachings, and if you can follow them properly, then your problem will be solved. So that was the main purpose why Sri Ramakrishna incarnated, according to Swamiji, that he came to solve the problems that have arisen in human hearts from time immemorial, because all these traditions have come down in different ways. Of course, he didn't say that Sri Ramakrishna was the last prophet, or he said such people will come down. Then cycles they will come. They will come again when the problem has changed. The complexity of the problems have changed. So when to suit the present day problems, he had to fight on so many fronts. Sri Ramakrishna. First of all, people had lost faith in religion. Then there was quarrel among the same religion and between religions. So in India, everything was there. There was the Jewish religion, there was the Christian religion, Sikhism, Islam for 700 years, then Buddhism, which was born almost in India. He was a rebel. They say Buddhism, Swamiji says Buddhism was a rebel child of Hinduism. So that was also a reformation. So when Hinduism was not understood properly, Buddha had to come to set it right. And then it became a new religion. So now when Sri Ramakrishna came, he solving all the problems, because he says, I have not come to create a new religion. I have just come to revive the old religions and say that each religion is true. That makes his message unique. Because if when he came to the West, some people wanted him to start a religion in the name of Ramakrishna. He said, I am not, he was not so narrow to start a religion. In fact, none of the prophets wanted to start. Christ did not start Christianity. Christ would have just preferred to live a holy life and inspire people wherever they are. But then later on, slowly the movements which people don't understand. Buddha never said my religion will be called Buddhism. He said everybody can get the light. And if he had stuck to his fundamental, that's why he was very, very cautious, Swami Vivekananda. Though he started the organization, he said don't limit Ramakrishna to any organization. He was far, far, far broader than what we can even conceive of him. He transcended all the religious differences. He just went to the core of human problems, human nature, and solve the problems from that level. That makes him unparalleled in the history of the world, because he didn't touch any religion, he just accepted them as they were. He practiced Christianity. Show one prophet who has practiced all the previous religions. That's why he says all the problems that have arisen in the human heart since time immemorial. When M says that, he means that problems were solved by different prophets in different ways, and Sri Ramakrishna came to tell these people, you solve the problem in the way your prophet has told you to do it, and you don't have to invent new ways. These things are already there. They had come with the only thing is the situation has changed. You have to adapt those teachings to the present day life. So that's why he taught. His message is not his own. His message is the, as Sri Ramakrishna said, the spiritual energies or the spiritual efforts of so many millions of people over so many centuries. He lived in one life, and he showed that none of these teachings have become old, provided you hold on to the essentials. And if you hold on to the essentials of any religion, you will reach the same goal. So you don't have to fight. You have to just believe in the sense, just practice, not just believe, but I try to experience what these prophets have experienced in their own life. Buddha said, when Ananda was crying, what will happen to earth? He said, don't worry, I got this light, I showed you the way, you practice it and be a light unto yourself. You have to be a light unto yourself. So whether it is Buddhism, whether it is Christianity, Islam, or even any of the religions, the prophets, they came with a particular message to suit that age. And Sri Ramakrishna lived those experiences. He said none of them were wrong. You don't have to establish one at the expense of another. They are equally true. Things can be equally true. There may be different paths, but they lead to the same goal. So this is so I'll we are running short of time. Let us have a few questions if you want to. It's 5:32 now, so I'll take leave. Next time we'll continue from this very interesting conversation now. Sri Krishna, I'll just read a small because he has just started. He's saying Sri Krishna is solving all the problems that have arisen in the human heart since the creation of the world. I'll just take 2-3 minutes more. This is a very important aspect which M is commenting. Normally he doesn't comment, he just reproduces Sri Krishna's words. But today he is very much inspired after hearing the conversation, that he is trying to give his own comment, what he feels about Sri Krishna. He says Padmalochan, Narayan Shastri, they are all great scholars who came to test Sri Krishna because people were not convinced. They thought he is just a madman. So in Dakshineshwar, these people, Mathur Babu himself had to invite some of those people, and they came naturally just to test him, and everybody went convinced that he was a spiritual giant. So M is aware of these things. So he says Padmalochan was a great scholar, Narayan Shastri was a Vedantin who had come from Gujarat, and then he renounced the world and died in Banaras, that's what they say, or he went to Kamakhya, perhaps. He went to Kamakhya in Guwahati, Assam. So he says Narayan Shastri, Gauri Pandit, Dayanand Saraswati. Dayanand Saraswati was the founder of Arya Samaj, a very big spiritual movement like Brahmo Samaj. But now it has slowly, it's not so popular as it was earlier. So Dayanand Saraswati and other scholars and scriptures sit in silent awe. Whenever they came, most of them came. Pandit Padmalochan Dayanand himself came when he heard of Sri Ramakrishna. So, and Dayanand Saraswati said such a wonderful remark he made about Sri Ramakrishna. He himself said, and M is quoting it, he said, we people are just happy with the milk. That means we have just tried to understand the scriptures, but Sri Ramakrishna is enjoying the butter. We are just happy with just the buttermilk, from which the butter has to be taken out. It has to be churned. He has churned it, he has got the essence. This is what Dayanand Saraswati himself was a great founder of Arya Samaj in Punjab. He spoke about Sri Ramakrishna. So he says, when Dayanand saw Sri Ramakrishna in that state of samadhi, he lamented. A founder of a religious movement saying this, we have studied so much of the Vedas and the Vedanta, but in this great man we see its manifestation. He proves that the learned only drink buttermilk when they churn the scriptures. Only such great men as he, pointing to Sri Ramakrishna, he says, eat the butter. Learned men like Keshav Chandra Sen, educated in English, are also amazed by Sri Ramakrishna. They think how wonderful is that this illiterate person can explain such matters in rustic language similar to the words of Jesus Christ. Thakur explains in the same way by parables so that all people, men, women, and children, can understand easily. Jesus repeated, Father, Father, like a madman. Ramakrishna is mad, crying, Mother, Mother. He has not merely an inexhaustible treasure of spiritual wisdom, but he also pours out endless pots of divine love. And he is a man of renunciation like Jesus. He has the same burning faith. That is why his words are so powerful. When worldly people talk, there is no power because they have no renunciation, no burning conviction in them. Learned men like Keshav Sen also wonder how this illiterate person can develop such broad mindedness. How wonderful! There is no ill will in him at all. He respects followers of all religions and quarrels with no one. So then there are other things which he is trying to explain. Some of the things like fighting from the fort. So we'll discuss it next time. So this Mahimacharan's conversation still going on. We'll be discussing it next Sunday. So if there are some questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. Yeah. I'll change to grid view. Yes. If you can't unmute yourself, just raise your hand. I will do it from here. I think some of you are finding it difficult. Yes. Yeah, please go on.
Swamiji.
Yes. Please introduce yourself. I can't see your face.
This is Desiree.
Huh?
This is Desiree from São Paulo.
Sao Paulo. Okay, fine. Yeah. Please carry on. Yeah.
Please, Swamiji, the power of Sri Ramakrishna could work on those people that even met him that time and even today is working. Can you explain a little bit more about this? For example, to a man that lived in the United States, he didn't know about Thakur, but this man in some way received something from this great spirituality of Thakur or not?
Yes, they definitely received. Otherwise, why would they come? So, what exactly is your question? That how those people were attracted? Huh?
Yes.
Okay. See, I'll give you the example of at least two great people or founders of religious movements. I'm not talking of the ordinary scholars. Many scholars came, many people came to Sri Ramakrishna in but these two, one was Dayanand Saraswati as we just discussed today, and the other was uh, Brahmo Samaj founder Keshav. I mean, founder was different, but Keshav was a Brahmo leader. He was one who consolidated the Brahmo Samaj. Rajaram Mohan Roy started this, but he was the one who consolidated. So these two people, though they were not satisfied with the confused state of affairs of Hinduism or any religion, Keshav Chandra Sen, he was Rajaram Mohan Roy, in fact, studied in England. So he had a lot of influence of Christianity. He read the Upanishads. He read many things, Buddhism. He read Persian. He read Urdu also. They say he compared so many scriptures. The founder, Rajaram Mohan Roy, and that is how the Brahmo Samaj was given. And because they were totally disillusioned by all religions, not only Hinduism but also the other religions which were being practiced in different ways. There was so much of discrimination, fighting, and quarrels. So they started. Now they were actually good people, but unfortunately they did not have the solution. And when Sri Ramakrishna, somehow they were staying in Kolkata. Kolkata was the capital of British India. So it was just maybe coincidence that Sri Ramakrishna, the ground was prepared for Sri Ramakrishna in Kolkata, near Kolkata. He was in Dakshineshwar. He was born in Kamarpukur, not very far. But the very fact that these people who studied in England and then started these great movements. Of course, Dayanand Saraswati never came to England. He was a great scholar who studied in the traditional university, traditional way there. But he was also equally influential, and there were other movements also. And this Gauri Pandit, all they were experts in Tantra. But there was Bhairavi Brahmani who came. She was also an expert. They were all great people in their own right, but they were great in their field alone. They were experts in one particular field. So when they came to Sri Ramakrishna, they wanted to know, they found to their surprise that he is accepting everything. In fact, if you see, so Keshav Chandra Sen found that he does not criticize Brahmo Samaj, he does not criticize Arya Samaj, he does not criticize Christianity, but he seems to know everything, the essence of all these religions. That impressed him. He said, we have just created a synthetic religion, but here is Sri Ramakrishna who is trying to go to the core of all religions and show that they are all same. So this was a new thing, and that is why it attracted these people and made them humble. Though they were great, but they could not give up the organization. They have started it. So naturally they continued it, but at least the people who followed these people, these founders, they became liberal and they started accepting other religions. So that is the benefit. Even Swami Vivekananda, who was Thakur's spokesman to the West, it was he for the first time who proved on the Parliament of Religions. So that's why he used to say that don't give credit to me. My master's room in Dakshineshwar was a much bigger Parliament of Religions even before I came to America. In Chicago, he told his devotees that you are think that I am a very powerful preacher and all those things. But this Parliament of Religions and the wonderful liberal ideas I am giving you, they are just a mere echo of my master, who was a living Parliament of Religions himself. He was a living Parliament. So, that is, I think you got the point. Huh? And this is how this is how Sri Ramakrishna, by his life and his experience, you see, his was not a theoretical knowledge. He did not try to bring scholars and academicians from different part of the world and uh, teach them that all religions point to the same goal. He experienced it. And when a person has experience, the power he emanates and the power of transformation increases dramatically. You can't convince a person by just logic or just by telling him. This Keshav Chandra Sen, if anybody else would have been there, they would have got angry, because he tells him that he tries to correct him in many ways. Even Dayanand Saraswati, he said, your heart is, I can clearly see within your heart there is so much of egoism. He told the founder, he says it appears red with rajas. Rajas is a quality which makes you highly egotistic. So he told openly, see, you will succeed more if you just, I can see the whole thing. I mean, he told the others, not in his presence, but he told some of the followers who are impressed by Dayanand Saraswati's wonderful movement. He said, I saw in his heart, I saw a deep red color, which is symbolic of tamas, of rajas. Rajasic person naturally wants to flaunt his spirituality. So that he pointed out the defects, and without any fear, without any because he could see those experiences. He did not judge a person intellectually, just he saw the inside of a person, whether he is a disciple or a great leader. For him, he was just like a child and like a prophet of the olden days, just as Jesus went to the Jewish synagogues and destroyed all he said, you have created a business of my father's place. They were doing money changers and all. So they were fearless people, they could experience. And that is why that fearlessness was not taken seriously. And these people used to come to him, uh, Keshav Chandra Sen and all the great people, and their followers were surprised. Our founder is such a great person. He has millions of followers, and this illiterate person in Dakshineshwar is attracting the attention. It is his spirituality. The higher you go, the more subtle your energies and your efforts are, and you don't remain stagnant at the intellectual level, the more powerful you become. So that is the secret of Sri Krishna's attraction. That is what attracted all the great people and continues to attract. This deep love. Love means unselfish love. He had nothing to gain. He did not want to start a movement. He just wanted everybody to realize God, to get salvation or mukti, whatever whatever name. God can be interpreted in so many ways. So God realization was the only goal of life. If anybody else also has that, then he will also be equally attractive. We can't have that, exert that influence, because we sincerely don't believe, like Sri Ramakrishna believed, that God is the only reality and all else is false. If we start believing, or any prophet or any preacher or anybody starts believing that genuinely and even has a little experience, then you will find that they will attract or they will impress the great scholars. Okay, am I clear, Desiree? I hope you are able to hear me. So shall I take your leave now? Hello? Yeah.
Pranam Guruji.
Yes, yes. Who's that?
Subrata Gupta.
Yes, yes.
And one question: did Thakur ever tell his devotees to worship him as their Ishta?
Did Thakur, just repeat the question? I'm getting a
Did
bit
Thakur
distracted. Hmm.
did
Did
Thakur
Thakur?
ever did Thakur ever tell any of his devotees to worship him as their Ishta?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because he gave the mantras. The Diksha mantras which you get, it is Thakur's own mantras. You see, he was like a child. He gave his own mantra, he worshipped his own photo. See, there was no ego in him. Huh? He gave his own mantra to Holy Mother, to other direct disciples. Otherwise, where do you think that Thakur's mantra has come from? It's not my invention. Yes, because he says he never referred to himself in the first person. When he pointed it, he was so much dependent on Mother. When he said he wanted to refer to himself, he said this body, as if he is a third person. Whenever he talked of himself as a gross person, he will say this body, this mind. He will not say me. That me and mine was not there in him. He was so innocent, like a child. A child does not have a feeling that it is my mother or my father. Though the very small child, it is very happy to go to anybody. You must have seen they don't have this. Slowly, then we put in their heads, that he is our person, he is our relative, he is not our relative, he should be, he is a stranger. A child has no idea of anybody as a stranger. He if he's very young, if his the ego has not come, I mean, ego is not manifested, then he is happy with anybody. So Sri Krishna was like that, and he could, whatever he said, he himself said, "Na, he who was Rama, who was Krishna, has come as Sri Krishna," because he experienced that. And not only that, the people who met him experienced, saw their ishtas in Sri Krishna. That is another great thing. He not because that's why they say his mantra contains all the gods and goddesses. The thing is, because you can have the vision of any god you want through him, because he had experienced them himself. And based on that, he said, Swami Vivekananda doubted him till the last day in the sense till he died, and he called him once. And he said, do you still disbelieve? I mean, after so much giving him so many spiritual experiences, Swami Vivekananda still could not believe that how can it be possible? And he had just that thought had come to his mind when Sri Ramakrishna looked at him as if he's looking at something inside a glass case, and he says, even now you have doubts. And Swamiji was astounded. He said, a casual thought came to me, doubt came to me, and this person sees me, sees all my doubts. And he says, even now you have doubts. And then that convinced him forever. And then he found totally that just as Rama's will, which we discussed now, if you see, once or twice he wrote when he was struggling, when the missionaries were against him in America, when he was struggling for some kind of recognition. He was struggling very hard. But at that time, in very, very wonderful ways, Sri Ramakrishna appeared to him and saved him. So he said, many times I seek human help and that I make a mistake by seeking human help. And he has never betrayed me. And that's why he loved Sri Ramakrishna so deeply. So Sri Ramakrishna he had that firm faith that whatever Sri Ramakrishna has said cannot be untrue. He tested him. He told Nivedita. Nivedita was very difficult for Nivedita to accept everything which Swamiji said. But he said, you should test me. I tested my guru for 6 years. I mean, 6 years he was so much influenced by Western philosophy and so many atheistic philosophy that he refused to believe that God can be so real. But anyway, towards the end of his life, he got so much convinced that he decided to leave everything to God, and you see the result, how he depended on God and finally accomplished his mission. Okay, so definitely your question was that whether he gave. Yes, he definitely gave, because he could experience himself as Rama and Krishna, so that mantra also and other mantras where other deities also can be worshipped in and through Sri Ramakrishna. He had a vision of Christ who merged in him. He had a vision of Buddha. He had a vision, so many visions, almost all gods and goddesses. So there is absolutely no doubt about it. Okay, so I take your leave now.
Thank you, Swami.
Because the battery is also getting low now. I am outside. I'm taking the class, so there's no power source. So before the battery goes away, I'll take your leave. Okay. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you, Guruji.
Namaste.